In this episode of Viewpoint, the Brian Heeraman podcast, we talk about Gary Griffith, who never seems to want to leave the news. The anti-gang bill is no more. Esport is playing development, and for some strange reason, COVID-19 is now leading to the cancellation of the holiday season. Welcome back, folks, to Viewpoint, the Brian Heeraman podcast, episode number 20. See that, yeah, guys? I didn't forget the episode number. Not this time around, anyway. Can you believe it? We've been doing this podcast for some 20 weeks now. And I feel like a batsman who just scored a double century or something. I don't know. Feels like some sort of momentous occasion for me. But all of this would not have been made possible without you, the folks' participation and your continued listenership and feedback. For that, I want to say thanks to everyone for their support. Pretty wet weather we've been having the last 3 or 4 days, and it's preventing a lot of outdoor activities. Well, in my case, me and my mates, we had to cancel golf this morning due to the inclement weather. And when I say this morning, I mean Sunday morning, of course. But I'm sure we can make up for that sometime during this week, after working hours, of course. Last thing I don't want anyone thinking is that we do golf during working hours. Never. Not us. I mean, with all this rain or not that we've been having, I've been finding it difficult to get my usual shut eye over the last couple of days. You see, I got this new coffee machine. I love it. It's one of those new Dominion coffee machine. It makes a pretty good brew, and it looks quite good as well. Although I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with this 150,000 extra cups of coffee. I guess I'll just be sipping coffee for quite some time, huh? Well, I don't know. Only Dominion makes a coffee machine, in my opinion, that's capable of magically multiplying the number of cups you get. And don't ever talk about the Dominion toilet set. I mean, that never stops flushing. I mean, all right, enough jokes about Dominion. Let me just take the opportunity here to make my pitch and to remind everyone that you can find this podcast on YouTube, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Twitter, and for my international friends out there, Spotify. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast and to share this podcast with your friends and family as well. So what are we talking about today? Well, let's start off by talking about the Commissioner of Police, Gary Griffith. I mean, this guy can't survive without the camera being in his face. Like one of those professional stars with professional representing a different kind of profession, of course, if you catch my drift. You see, the problem with Gary Griffith is that he sees himself like one of those super cops from TV, like that guy from NCIS, Leroy Gibbs, or even Columbo. And Gary's mission is to save the population from themselves, from all things bad and evil. But the problem with that is that Gary Griffith wants to be the one to determine what is good and bad. But you see, that doesn't work in a free society and a democracy. So the Commissioner of Police constantly finds himself wearing a different hat all the time. Most times, these hats has no bearing on the role and function of Commissioner of Police. This time in Meeting the Press, starring Gary Griffith as financial advisor, banker, wealth planner, and broker. You see, folks, Gary's back at it again, but with the DSS, that is the drug susu. And he's lambasting the supporters of the drug susu, saying that the pyramid scheme will eventually collapse. Collapse to the detriment of thousands of people going forward. And those who don't agree with him, he's actually calling them greedy and stupid. Now, Gary Griffith, armed with a diagram, this star boy, this new self-appointed individual wealth firm operating as some sort of central bank, explains scheme after scheme of how many people it would take to pay out this amount as compared to that amount. I mean, to the point where you reach level 4 here, where dark side apparently eventually emerges. This is all a movie for Gary Griffith, you know. It's all a movie for him. But the only thing is that the guest of this movie is you, the people. And the investors in this movie are the ones invested in the DSS. Time and time again, Gary fails to recognize that there is something fundamental in free societies, and that is freedom of choice. I honestly don't think he can stand folks being free. I think that is a big part of it. Folks, we can't protect people from making free decisions, especially when the market is open and fair. People take chances in life, whether that chances come from a lotto ticket or even the DSS. I don't see anyone going to shut down Playway when thousands of people lose even thousands of dollars and families are broken up because of gambling addiction. Just because your government gives NLCB a stamp of approval and makes NLCB no different in terms of the principle, it makes them no different. Chance is chance, and we must learn to respect the right of the individual to invest his or her money wherever they see fit. Just because the government could collect tax from NLCB, that makes it no different from DSS. Only to the fact that DSS operates outside of the whole legitimate process of tax collection, but people exercising freedom of choice. I don't understand. But this commissioner of police also went on to knock members of the media during his press conference. He said they have been lauding the man at the center of the investigation. I think his name is Heeraman, aka Priest Clark, as a businessman. They've been knocking him and calling him a businessman. According to Colombo, well, sorry, according to Gary, members of the media have done everything to express how good a man he is, and that says a lot about where we have reached as a society. Well, one thing for Gary Griffith, I can agree with you, dear, indeed. You see, we as a society must take a deeper look at ourselves, especially when we have allowed a rock like you to be sitting on a chair of Commissioner of Police. Colombo went on to go through the files of the DSS and said he's going to go through them with a fine-tooth comb, searching for any illegal activity that can be attributed to the DSS. That's what he said. I mean, really, Gary? Did you use the same vigor to comb through the files of A&V drilling? Are you using the same files for ACP Hackshaw, the same depth? Are you going through them in the same way? What about that minister who took to the bank some $100,000 in cash? But then again, according to you, that minister has 40 years experience and service to the country. But I'm not quite sure if that is the real reason why he doesn't want to go through with such vigor. I think it's because the friends are connected. And DSS are just, I guess, probably simple people and easier targets to divert attention from probably bigger issues in Gary's circles, such as crime out of control and his constant incompetence in his operations. You want to see that he wants to see a receipt from every investor in DSS. Well, we the people want to see details of every check paid to his wife from the coffers of the taxpayers, because there's a lot of rumors going on what's happening there. But let's change focus. Let's focus on this anti-gang bill. We haven't left Gary Griffith yet by any chance. You see, moving on to the anti-gang bill. Now, this bill is proposed, this legislation, it proposed that it allows for police officers to search the premises without a warrant if there's reasonable belief, and that the property can be forfeited in certain circumstances. This is a piece of legislation that allows for the trampling of the rights of citizens at any point in time. In my mind, this legislation is draconian as they come. There is no proper analysis of the benefits of the legislation versus the constitutional rights of the public. But that's just how it is. But thankfully, the UNC opposition heeded the calls of right-thinking citizens such as myself, and I do call myself right-thinking, and they declined to renew the 30-month sunset clause, which ended, or is ending, I think, this month. The opposition on Friday, they did not support the government's attempt to extend the life of the bill. And I think the bill failed in committee stage by a vote, let me check the vote, by a vote of 24 and 19 abstaining. The law needed apparently a three-fifths majority to pass, I believe it was, yes. And the opposition did not give his support. Now I listened to part of this debate, and I read where the MP for Barataria Sanwan, that is MP Saddam Hussein, said that the bill did nothing to address murders and the feeling of safety by residents across the country. I totally see in, I totally agree in the 7.5 years that this bill has done nothing significant and has achieved nothing significant, and the statistics have shown that. You see, this law, this law that Gary is attempting, has no impact whatsoever on the murder rate in Trinidad and Tobago. The law is, it's like the legislation, the parliamentary body, that legislative arm of the government, has gone insane when it comes to this law. People need to understand that laws alone won't reduce crime. And a very important point was made by Saddam Hussein is that many of the offences under the anti-gang legislation exist as part of other laws. That's what he said. The MP even went on further to argue that this opposition is not going to be any rubber stamp to this government, and it is high time the government come to the people with more than fancy words and narrative or threats that attempt to further erode the rights of citizens via the anti-gang bill. They keep saying that if they don't have the anti-gang bill, all hell will break loose and the sky will fall. But no, they have not used the anti-gang bill to any extent, and all hell hasn't broken loose to whatever extent that we consider hell to be, and the sky is still up there. But it's all tomfoolery, you see. But right after the bill was defeated, here comes your boy Gary Griffith, Colombo. Here comes Colombo. Here he's saying that immediately following the defeat of the bill, the police commissioner Gary Griffith, in a WhatsApp message, is what he's saying. Let me quote him accurately here. Unfortunately, petty politics yet again takes precedence over doing what is right for the country. We just arrested a major person of interest involved in gang activity, over 70 in the last few years. It was a major deterrent that contributed to over 115 murders this year, compared to the same period for last year, apparently. But really, Gary, is that what the bill did? If so, please tell us how. Tell us how many murders this bill prevented and how. You said 115. Tell us how. Tell us where. Tell us by whom. Please give us something. Could it be that the 115 less murders that you're attributing to the bill was reduced, or any impact was as a result of the leading up to the general elections where traditionally the murder rate declines? Or maybe it was of the COVID-19 virus and the restrictions? What do you think, Gary? Tell us something. You see, he then went on in his usual blame style, adding that it seems that this bill was an issue for some politicians. Hear what he said. Heaven forbid if and when gang murders increase, I hope that those who rejected the bill could be prepared to answer to their God and the citizens of this country. Well, I want Gary to know, let God worry about that. And you worry about finally doing your job. You see, folks, Gary is not Columbo. He's not Leroy Gibbs. And in any event, those are TV characters. Gary's true nature is from yet another picture. This time, Tombstone. And his character of choice is Johnny Ringo. That makes you and I the folks at his mercy unless we find some sort of Wyatt Earp or Doc Holliday shows up. In any event, Gary Griffith is not a super cop. I want to move on to something else. COVID-19. I remember in my last podcast, I mentioned that the COVID-19 rates were going to go up, given that our the so-called CARICOM bubble has now been null and void. It's exploded. And the intention was to keep the rates down to during the bubble. But now that that bubble no longer exists, we're going to see the rates going up. So, according to the Ministry of Health releases this week, the numbers of COVID-19 cases increased on Tuesday by 39, Wednesday 45, Thursday 53, Friday it had a decline to 28, and Saturday It's 126. The total number of cases, I think, is now 6,000, sorry, and 6,400. And I think that's remain at 115, I believe it was. As I've said before, this whole COVID-19 is all about control. With no more Caribbean bubble, and already you're seeing the cases going up, so that we can return to fear and to justify control. Now, why do I bring these numbers up? Well, as it turns out, the police apparently went out to a private party and detained some 200 people for breaking the COVID-19 regulation as per the Ministry of Health. You see, this is important because you would recall that when this issue of private parties became a thing, residents in Bayshore Towers, well, they basically got a get out of jail free card in the name of private property. Now, I fully endorse not letting police enter private property, save and except for a warrant. However, this Zessa party, I think it took place in Kelly Village, Caroni, where 200 people was detained, and apparently the law was broken as it relates to paragraph 4D of the regulations, where citizens are not allowed to have public parties or fetes on private property. You see, this part of the regulation came to me like a thief in the night, because I really wasn't following it that closely. But apparently, if you're selling something on your property, alcohol or tickets or whatever, for an event, it becomes a public venue. Now, I'm not quite sure how legal this is because I don't understand how you can take private property and because you're selling something on that private property, it becomes public property. I'm not sure about it. I think we need to get some sort of legal advice or legal counsel on that. I'm sure it's more than just that simple. To me, the rule changes are only affecting, one section of people. And I expect the debate to continue since a wedding was apparently held somewhere in Valsin and crowds and all what that was there. But because nothing was being sold and I guess no police showed up, well, at least that is the explanation that Johnny is giving us. But some are saying that the high profile guests may just be the real reason why no one showed up. But I want to move on to something now, another point, another topic. This whole development as it relates to East Port of Spain. So have you all been following this entire issue as it relates to the development or the redevelopment of East Port of Spain? Alan Roberts has an interesting video, or yes, two videos actually on his Facebook page, and I think everyone should have a listen to those videos. Because the Prime Minister has advised the residents of East Port of Spain and Silots to seize upon an opportunity to move out of Esquala, if it becomes necessary, that is, to develop those areas. And the Prime Minister also went on to take on skeptics of his development plan, his rejuvenation plan, and those who call his plan a pipe dream, and question what's being done and why it's being done. Now that word pipe dream, we come back to that word. You see, the Prime Minister said he did not mention the plan before the general election because he didn't want it to be seen as an election gimmick. But I don't think that's the real reason. I don't think reasonable people think that's the real reason. I think he knew fully well that if he mentioned that plan, which was discussed in 2017, apparently letters are dated in 2017, he knew fully well that I'm not quite sure the election result would have changed, but maybe it would have changed the dynamic of campaigning because the people of Lavender have always supported the PNM for since whenever I could think about it. So I'm not quite sure that would have changed the results of the election if he had mentioned the plan, but I think it would have changed the dynamics of campaigning. So that's why I think he didn't mention it. You see, he said this big conversation that's being held in some quarters was moronic, and he doesn't understand it. And people telling the residents of East Port of Spain that government coming for the land is nothing but tomfoolery. But the Prime Minister said that if a resident of East Port of Spain are asked to move, they should move. This is what he said. He said, if you don't move, that means you will stay in squalor for the next 40 years. You mightn't like that, but your children wouldn't like it. And I will say the same thing to the Sea Lots residents. If this PNM government comes and tells you to move, it is because it wants to improve your condition and to make the best of the location that you now occupy. Well, I'm sure they want to make the best of the location they now occupy, but I dare question, but for whose interest? You see, Rowley said that he was amazed that a member of parliament with a social report, remember that word, a social report, was trying to use it as a political battering ram to tell the people who are to benefit to not to leave their area. You know, that whole thing about social report, like I said, we come back to that. The document that Arnold Robert was reading from, in my opinion, is no social report. You see, Arnold Robert did a pretty good job in explaining what a social report is. But it was a letter that the agency wrote to some group telling them that they had accepted the plan to acquire lands for redevelopment. You see, folks, these residents have been, as I mentioned, supporters of the PNM for God knows how long. And to me, it's like a slap in the face to ask the same people to move out for little or nothing. You see, once these residents move out, they will never, and I say never, have the opportunity to return home, or should I say, quote unquote, home. You see, no one is going to invest millions of dollars and give it up for nothing. Businesses don't operate in social projects or in social development. They are all about profits. Simple as that. And there's nothing wrong with making profits. And remember that word pipe dream that fellow skeptic that Rod was referring to? I think it's this guy here, Derek Chin. Yeah, I mentioned Derek Chin before in this podcast, the movie tongue guy. You see, some 10 years ago, Derek Chin had a vision, a dream, to create a big project, I think it was along in Vedas Bay, called Streets of the World. I remember the project quite clearly, in which he claimed he would have boost tourism and employment in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, Mr. Chen is now saying that his Prime Minister talk about revitalization of the capital city was commendable, but there could be another pipe dream. You see the word there, pipe dream? He's clearly referring to Derek Chin. He said if the government, and as I'm saying Derek Chin now, said that if the government has serious about developing the country, then Streets of the World would have been given an opportunity to do that. You see, when everything fell apart according to Chin, the Streets of the World money went into Guyana and built Guyana Movie Town. Well, okay. The Chin plan for Invaders Bay apparently included a museum for Sparrow and others, like a wax museum for all sportsmen and for all other musicians. And Chin said, he said new buildings might come, but that wasn't the true vitalization which would see people come in or revenue being generated. He said Streets of the World would have been a melting pot for all different cultures, and Carnival would have been a major showcase. But that's just what it was. That's what he's saying Streets of the World was. And he's now trying to compare that to the revitalization plan of Port of Spain. You see, I'm not quite sure what is actually going to happen with this whole revitalization plan, but I'm going to keep looking on to it because to me it's important. And with all this talk about revitalization of Port of Spain, comes the Prime Minister admitting that Queen Street, Port of Spain, is named which was named in recognition, of Jenny Commission, and Jenny Commission is the official tourist of Port of Spain. But here I think the Prime Minister is being less than candid. You see, in my opinion, he left out Treasury Street, which is just as bad or probably even worse than Queen Street. You see, instead of calling upon the city corporation and asking them what the hell they're doing, get off their behinds and do their jobs, probably wash down the streets or something like that, the Prime Minister makes public statements like this, and I just don't understand how he could not have any shame. You see, even by some sort of PNM or government standards, that should be an embarrassing statement for anyone to make. And especially given the fact that Port of Spain has been represented by the People's National Movement, the PNM, at both local and parliamentary level forever. In any serious society, I think the mayor would have stepped down. He would have resigned by now. But let's explore this more in Trinidad and Tobago economy in context. You see, the reality is businesses are closing down. Employees are being sent home people are actually avoiding Port of Spain. 1 year after Yara Trinidad Limited announced the closure of its wholly owned ammonia plant at Point Fortin, it actually retrenched 30 workers now. So that's the end of that. Now, on November 13, 2019, Yara apparently announced the closure of its plant, citing profitability and failed negotiations with the National Gas Company. Now, I'm not quite sure if I mentioned this in previous podcast episodes, but NGC is selling gas to those downstream companies at a rate that is so high that is making it impossible for them to make a profit. And that's why we're having so much plant closures, because they are not willing to operate without making profits. It's as simple as that. Now, right now, Yara has two plants in operation, Tringen 1 and Tringen 2, which is a joint operation between Yara and NEL being the National Enterprises Limited. But further deterioration of the economy is being shown, with Sagicor now losing $29.5 million US for the period ending September 30th, 2020. Again, First Citizens has decided to permanently close its foreign exchange facility at Piaco International Airport at the end of this month. Now, they have made previous publishing this in the press that at the end of November, but they published it in March, I believe, and they said now in November it's going to be closed completely. But I don't think they have cited the real reason being the airport is not in operation and there's no activity, so that's the reason. But that is not the real reason. You see, RBC used to have a US dollar ATM in the airport as well. That is now gone. They had previously moved it to the duty free section, but it's now totally gone. The unit trust also announced that by August, well, in August, it was removing its facility from there as well. But the real reason that these operations have been moved from the Piaco International Airport is because there is no US for them to carry out trade with it. It's a very difficult market, especially when the US that they need in their operations, they can't be selling it just like that. Moreover, Chin has now officially announced that Movitown Chaguanas is not coming back to Chaguanas anytime in this future, because the disagreements that they had with their tenants, they can't come to any conclusion, so they have now decided to move on to another location when this whole COVID-19 scenario has come to an end. And if all this bad news about the economy wasn't going to put you in a dampened Christmas spirit, I mean, all this unemployment and all this retrenchment, money being tight, here comes the health minister on Saturday at a news conference in Tobago, urging all chambers of commerce not to have office parties for Christmas. He asked for religious leaders not to encourage gathering for Christmas. He disclosed that the ministry will have no office Christmas party. I mean, it's almost like if this government has now taken up the role as of the Grinch, you know? I don't understand it. It seems as though everything is going bad. The minister advised people to celebrate within their own bubble and not to accept invitations to attend weddings, office parties, or parang. Wow. I think this Terrence the Alsing is the Grinch that stole Christmas. And I don't understand it. I mean, whatever. But I want to end this podcast on some good news. Donald Trump has promised a vaccine to be for this COVID-19 before the end of the year, and thankfully Pfizer and a company called Moderna Incorporated has announced that their vaccine is now 95% effective, which is amazing. So I'm hoping that before the end of the year, and by the time this vaccine is released, not just to first world countries, but countries within the Caribbean as well, this whole new normal rubbish that I hate will come to an end, and we return to our normal way of life, whereby we can go out there and just, just be free and not have to worry about all these stupid controls and restrictions that create a bunch of problems between citizens and the police. Because these problems, these arrests, these people being detained would never have occurred if these restrictions are not in place. I think when when the normal returns, I want to see what they're going to use these police officers that they find time to go to these parties. I want to see what's going to happen to them. I want to see how they're going to reallocate these resources and to see what happens. I do also want to comment on this whole U.S. election thing taking place, but I see they're talking about releasing the Kraken in terms of all its allegations of voter fraud. But I want to wait and see what happens during the course of this week as to what those documents actually entail before making comment. But if I were to just mention that what some of these lawyers were saying, that how this whole Dominion voting machine system has drag and drop functions that allow votes to be switched from Trump to Biden, but it's always strange to me how come all these system glitches with this Dominion voting machine always seem to benefit Biden. I mean, that is strange to me. But in the meantime, our government just wants us to sit down, shut up, put your mask on, lock yourself up in your house, and now cancel all holidays apparently. It's all about do as I say and not as I do. But in the end, I think I think what's going to happen in the end when this vaccine comes, everything is going to return, and all these games and all these incompetent people that have been throwing their weight around, it will soon come to an end. So be safe, folks. Stay tuned for episode 21.